It was autumn 2009, and I was in Rotterdam rehearsing for a series of concerts. A few months prior, I'd received my master's in percussion performance from the Royal Dutch Conservatory in The Hague. I'd been studying classical music since the age of 4, and music had taken me thousands of miles away from the farm where I grew up in Southeast Iowa. My final performance at the conservatory had been a collaborative concert with my now husband, Matt Jenkins. This performance required nearly a year of preparation and an entire semi-truck full of percussion and audio equipment. This was during the 2009 economic crisis. Beginning a 6-year PhD program in classical music didn't seem any less risky than moving back to our home country and pursuing another kind of dream job, becoming a park ranger. After a little investigatory work, and by a little, I mean 72 hours, Matt had researched, interviewed, and accepted a year-long internship position with the vegetation program at Grand Canyon National Park. I told him to go for it. How could you ever give up the opportunity to live and work for any amount of time at the Grand Canyon? Between concerts, I came back to the US to visit him. When it was time to return to Europe, even though I finally had the opportunity to work and perform as a professional musician, I wasn't sure I really wanted to go. Maybe it was having spent thousands of hours in the practice room where the walls were never more than a few feet apart. Maybe it was having been confronted by a landscape like the Grand Canyon where the realm of possibility seemed to extend for miles towards distant plateaus and mesas. Maybe I was just ready for a new challenge and ready to explore another part of myself. Having seen an advertisement online for a 3-month winter volunteer position at Desert View, I decided I would apply. From the hotel room in Rotterdam, I called the supervisor at Grand Canyon. She said, "You're where? You do what? You really want to come to Grand Canyon to volunteer?" I said, "Yes." And she gave me a chance. The position would require shoveling snowy sidewalks and talking with visitors about archaeology at the Tucson Museum and Ruin. I made the decision to cancel all of my concerts for the rest of that season. Although the decision took a number of friends and family by surprise, there wasn't a single one of them that could look me in the eye and say that they too wouldn't jump at the opportunity to live at the edge of Grand Canyon. I returned to Iowa. My parents, thinking I'd never move back from Europe, had sold my car that was sitting in their garage. My mom generously offered me hers, but there was a catch. It was a stick shift. I'd have to learn how to drive it before heading west to Arizona. The safest place to learn how to drive a manual transmission in rural Iowa was, of course, the town cemetery. Narrow gravel lanes, sharp turns, rolling hills made the perfect obstacle course for the tiny little 2-seater convertible. For the next few days, my mom patiently sat shotgun as I lurched and stalled the engine over and over and over again. It didn't take long to pack because the trunk is only big enough for a duffel bag and a road atlas. Fortunately, Matt would fly to Iowa to help me drive it back to Grand Canyon. I showed up for the first day of my volunteer position, top down, smart dress, heels, bright red lipstick. The rangers were all very welcoming, but I'm sure that they were quietly taking bets as to how long I would last in such a remote locale. While volunteering, I learned from my supervisor and the permanent rangers. Through their work in visitor engagement, I began to understand the mission of the National Park Service and the value of preserving places and their stories in perpetuity. They also opened my eyes to all of the different types of work that park rangers do: emergency medicine, search and rescue, backcountry travel. When I learned that there were rangers below the rim giving interpretive talks at Indian Garden and Phantom Ranch, I knew that is where I wanted to be. But I would need to gain new skills in order to be competitive for one of those rare and highly coveted positions in the backcountry. It would be a long road. Matt and I began by enrolling in an EMT course. While Matt would go on to attend the Park Ranger Law Enforcement Training Academy, I would transition from being a volunteer to a seasonal park ranger at Desert View. We both chose to pursue an online graduate certificate in wilderness management through the University of Montana. While taking classes, we were able to work full-time at Grand Canyon through a student internship program. During that period, I got my first opportunities to fill in for staff below the rim. Hiking down the Bright Angel and the South Kaibab trails to Indian Garden and Phantom Ranch, I loved it. In their rustic amphitheaters, I'd found a new stage, one in which I was surrounded by the soaring walls of the canyon and lit by thousands of dazzling stars. The weekends, however, were spent inside, doing homework. It seemed ironic to be studying wilderness management from a textbook when our backyard consisted of 1.1 million acres of proposed wilderness. In spring of 2015, nearly 6 years after we'd arrived at Grand Canyon, Matt and I had both finally completed our graduate studies, required trainings, and had been hired into permanent positions in the Backcountry District. Matt is a visitor and resource protection ranger, and myself is an interpretive park ranger. Arriving at these landmarks in life calls for a celebration. When you live and work in the backcountry of Grand Canyon, what better way to celebrate than to go for a hike? In this case, a long one, a really, really long one. In the winter of 2015 to 2016, we would attempt to hike the length of the Grand Canyon from Pierce Ferry to Lee's Ferry. It would be one continuous journey beneath the rim on the north side of the Colorado River. We estimated it would take 50 days. We'd hike somewhere in the ballpark of 650 miles, 95% of which would be off-trail hiking. We'd be embarking on a world-class expedition in our backyard. Less than a dozen men were known to have previously thru-hiked the length of the canyon. When developing our route, we took into account all of the firsthand experience we'd gained from our years living and working at Grand Canyon. We examined maps on many different scales. We sifted through every guidebook ever written about Grand Canyon hiking. We meticulously read through the trip reports, logs, and journals of legendary canyon hikers, and we sought out living canyon experts to ask them stories, ask them questions, listen to their stories, and learn from their experiences. There were stressors and unknowns leading up to the trip: logistics, winter weather, treacherous terrain. We spent months just taste testing recipes and preparing food, caching it in buckets, putting the buckets at strategic points along our route. Each one of these caching trips was an adventure in and of itself. And yet some portions of the hike would simply remain a mystery. On December 12th, 2015, we put on our packs, waved goodbye to our friends, and we began walking up Pierce Canyon. The rest of the world fell away. It'd be the two of us for the next month and a half. At the longest stretch, we went 12 consecutive days without seeing another human. Water in the form of snow and rain was a challenge to hiking, but a gift when traversing notoriously dry sections of the canyon. You cannot hike that many days in a row without soreness, scrapes, bruises, and lots of cactus spines stuck beneath your skin. Matt, having shared many miles on the trail with me prior to this trip, knew that my athletic endurance and my willpower to continue would hinge upon one thing: a seemingly endless supply of gummy bears. Not every day was easy. In fact, I cannot think of a single one that was, and that's okay. Prior to the trip, we spent a lot of time talking about EB, or expedition behavior. What's expedition behavior? It's treating each other with respect. It's sharing tasks around camp. It's carrying your fair share of the weight. It's having open, honest conversations about risk. It's resisting the temptation to play the blame game when things don't go as expected. And above all, it is no whining. The only time I cried in those 47 days was when we arrived at the Lee's Ferry boat ramp and our hike was over. The days on our through hike were so vivid. Staring out at the expanse over the Santup Plateau, wading through the frigid waters of Kanab Creek on New Year's morning, sharing unforgettable meals with friends at the Tuweep and Phantom Ranger stations, one of which was Helen Ranny, who hiked in fresh Thai food from Flagstaff. And just traversing the edge of the Redwall limestone, perched 500 feet above the Colorado River, going through Marble Canyon for just days on end. Each time we arrived at a cache bucket, we celebrated. We tore open a fresh bag of frozen gummy bears. Any amount of time spent in the backcountry at Grand Canyon is fleeting. However, the memories are long-lasting, sharp, and clear. They are chiseled in our minds, rich in color. Experiences such as our through hike and the journey to becoming a backcountry ranger have become ingrained as a part of who I am. Now, reflecting back 10 years on my final months in Europe, I believe I found the music that I was looking for all along, echoing off Grand Canyon's walls.